Okay, welcome to From Code to Call for Papers, crafting abstracts that get you selected. This is for people interested in wanting to speak at CodeMash and improve their chances of getting selected. This is the second year we've done this presentation, and we had a lot of success last year with people attending and or watching the video on YouTube that were then able to submit and get selected at CodeMash. Let me warn you too, we are recording this right now so that we can put it on YouTube. So keep that in mind as we're going through the presentation. I often done this in a workshop format as well, but due to the fact we're doing this over the lunch hour, we will probably not take the time out to actually work on titles and abstracts, but I'll give you other options on how you can get feedback on those later on. So my name is Chris Judd. I'm changing jobs at the end of this month, so I have 2 days left, and I'm going to be going to Columbus State Community College, become a software development instructor full-time. A couple other things about me. I recently completed my MBA at Ohio State Fisher College of Business. I'm a Java champion. I'm John Maxwell certified, AWS certified. I ran the Central Ohio Java Users Group for about 25 years, and when I'm not writing code, I tend to write words. Now, you may be asking yourself, why are you here speaking about this topic, Chris? And I think there's a number of reasons why CodeMash asked me to. For one, I've been involved in CodeMash every year since the very beginning. I was a part of the very original planning committee at the dinner where we actually got the ball moving for CodeMash. I've spoken at 120 conferences across 4 countries. I've also been involved in the selection committee on CodeMash for most of the years. And one of the things I do in that role is at the end of CodeMash, or at the end of the selection process, if you were not selected to speak, you can ask for feedback on your abstracts, and I provide all that feedback. And so probably 75 abstracts a year, I give very detailed feedback on afterwards. But I'm going to also offer this, and I offer this to a lot of people. The best time to get that feedback is before you submit. So you can also send me your abstracts and titles and bios, and I will be happy to give you feedback prior to the event as well. So ultimately, I've read a lot of abstracts, and I've written a lot of abstracts, so that's what kind of qualifies me to talk about this topic. Now, I want you to be aware that if you want to get selected to speak at CodeMash, there's some things that are musts. You must be an expert on your topic. You must have all of your slides completed before you submit. You must have spoken at hundreds of conferences in the past, be a published author, be a Microsoft MVP or a Java champion or the equivalent in Docker and the other technologies, have a super popular YouTube channel, podcast plural site, work for a huge technology company, especially in AI, or you must be Guy Royce. That is going to guarantee you get selected at CodeMash. Actually, those are all myths that I've heard over the years. None of those are true. You definitely don't need to be an expert. I'm going to talk about today, you don't want to have all your slides done. We have a lot of first-time speakers at conferences speaking at CodeMash. Most of the speakers are not published authors or champions or YouTube channels. So again, all of this is just myths. I'm going to talk to you about really how do you get selected, the process, the things that will make you more successful, more likely. I'm going to talk to you about the math behind it as well, so that you have some insights and maybe can make some suggestions otherwise. But I have to say, it doesn't hurt to be Guy Royce to get selected. He's a very popular speaker, but we'll talk about too that we have a blind step in the process, and so you can't also rely on name recognition either, even if you're Guy Royce. So I'm assuming you're here because you want to speak at CodeMash. Now, any conference will do as well. It doesn't have to be CodeMash. The things we're going to talk about today will apply to any conference, user group, even if you want to speak at an internal company conference or to your team. A lot of this stuff will be valuable regardless. Now, one thing I always like to think about when submitting to a conference, or if you're especially if you're a first-time conference speaker, why do you want to do this? What is your goal? What outcome do you want to have? And there's a number of those. So some of the ones I think about is, do you want to promote yourself or build a brand? And it may not just be about yourself. It could be your company, maybe a product or service. So speaking at a conference is a great way of getting recognized and getting your message out. Maybe it's for personal growth. Maybe you feel stifled in your role and you just want to challenge yourself in some way. That's a great reason to speak. Another really valuable one is to force yourself to become deeper in a topic and to understand that topic better. So the best way to learn a topic is to actually teach it, and that helps you to become more of an expert and grow in that technical area. So I highly recommend that to be a reason. Maybe you just want to give back to the community. Maybe you've been attending CodeMash for 10 years now and you're like, I've gained so much from it, I want to give back. Maybe you think it sounds fun. Maybe you want to network. So one of the great things about speaking at a conference is that attendees tend to come to you as opposed to you having to go to somebody else. And this is a great reason in the book. One of my favorite books is Never Eat Alone. And he talks about the value of networking at a conference and how much easier that is as a speaker. The number one reason people want to speak at CodeMash is because you do get a free room and a free ticket to the event. So again, it's the number one reason. A lot of people try to get into that and they'll submit just hoping to get that. I don't think that's the best reason. I think all the other reasons above it are better reasons, but that is a common reason. And then finally, how about having fun? Not just the speaking part, but attending the conference. It's a great event and you'll have tons of fun. Now we're going to talk about the process today, and we're going to walk through this process, at least part of it in detail and some of the rest of it a little bit more higher level, but this is the flow and what we're going to talk about for the rest of the session. First, we're going to talk about picking a topic in an audience. We're going to talk about writing the title, the description, and the bio, how to submit that proposal, and then you'll get a message of whether you got selected or rejected. You'll prepare your presentations, your materials, your content. Hopefully you'll rehearse it. Then you'll come to CodeMash and deliver a winning talk. And then really importantly, you're going to want to reuse, refine, and repeat that presentation over and over again. And when I think about this whole process, I also think about it from a minimum viable product standpoint. Just like if you were to build a brand new product for the market, hopefully you don't go out there and build the Rolls Royce of that product on the very first try, because it's not going to succeed very well. You're going to want to work your way up. Start with the minimum thing you need. And this minimum viable product works really well with thinking about how to prepare for a conference and submitting. So again, going back to this process, what I've done here is I've put those same things. So to me, the first step in the minimum viable product, that skateboard, can we even move, is we need to pick the topic in the audience and we need to write the title, description, and bio. If you don't have those, then the rest of the stuff doesn't matter. You shouldn't be preparing the presentation, the material, because you're not going to deliver the talk, and you're not going to rehearse, and you're not going to deliver the talk, and you're not going to reuse it. So we're going to focus on everything above the line today. This is going to be our deep focus because you don't need to keep moving forward. So let's talk about how do you pick a topic and define your audience. And some of this may surprise you a little bit. First, realize that the audience that attends CodeMash and other technical conferences are likely to be professionals and professionals in the software development and engineering spaces, architects, DevOps, security, DBAs, and QA. So they're likely working in the field. Sometimes we get submissions for, hey, I want to talk about how do we get high school students to get excited about technology. Great topic, but that is not going to hit the majority of the audience that we have at CodeMash. They're coming to learn how to be better professionals most of the time. In addition to that, CodeMash is a unique event in that we have multiple disciplines. So one of the reasons we created CodeMash is 20 years ago, this is literally the 20th year, so 20 years ago, most of the conferences were held on the East Coast or the West Coast, and you would go to a Java conference, or you would go to a Microsoft conference, or you would go to a Ruby conference, and you didn't actually have multiple disciplines there, and you weren't interacting with them. And that changes the perspective of how you might want to write and target some of your audience, because you may have people who are just dabbling in that technology, and they just might want to, maybe they're going primarily for what they do in their daily job, but they're maybe interested in hardware, and so they want to find out a little bit about that, or a different programming language, and what concepts can I learn from that to apply. So one of the things you should think about is not going super, super deep. So we have had topics in the past like how to read or reverse engineer Java bytecode, which I find a fascinating topic, but we had very few attendees, even though we had a really well-known speaker talking about the topic, because it's just the next bullet, too niche for the multidiscipline audience. It's too deep. So sometimes you need to pull it up maybe a little bit and think about, how can I attract a bigger audience? Another thing to think about is if you wanted to talk about, let's say, REST APIs, you could write a topic on how to write REST APIs in .NET and deploy it to Azure using these specific services. Once you start doing that, well, if you have audience that might be using Python or Java or other languages, now maybe they don't feel as included in that topic. So think about the fact that we have multiple disciplines attending. You don't want to be too deep, too niche. You also want to be very timely. So I remember one time a friend of mine submitted a talk talking about, in the title, about Java beans and how Java beans were great and how they could solve these problems. And they were surprised that they didn't get selected. Problem was, the topic really wasn't Java beans. And as I pulled out what he was going to talk about, it was actually about a framework that utilized Java beans. But no one's going to say, oh, Java beans, that's a new technology. That's something I'm going to want to learn about. So even if it's an older technology, but you can define it a little bit differently, you're going to have a better chance of getting selected. Also, I was reminded one time, people like to go to conferences because they want to learn what's coming, what's new, not necessarily what they're using today or what they used 10 years ago. So think about that while you're thinking about, is this appropriate for today, or people, even more so, 6 months from now when the actual conference happens, it will still apply. And it doesn't mean that everything has to be AI, because there are things that would apply. There's also timeless concepts like architecture that wouldn't have the same constraints as like a term of Java beans. So think about that. Also, make sure it's relevant to the people. Sometimes we have people that want to talk about how to generate sounds using obscure technologies, and maybe that's an interesting topic, and maybe a lot of people would attend it, but is the majority of attendees going to be interested in that? Probably not if they're doing business applications on a day-to-day basis. So again, think about the audience. One thing to think about the audience too is we have about 1,500 people who attend CodeMash regularly. So what we're trying to do is have 10 rooms. We're trying to have topics that will attract 10%. So approximately 150 people ideally would want to attend these types of sessions. So if you write something that's too nichey, doesn't cover more disciplines than maybe what you use on a daily basis, isn't timely, and we get 4 or 5 attendees for your talk, well, then we're not utilizing our space well, we're not utilizing our financial resources well, and maybe you got selected one year, but that topic may not get selected in a future year because, again, we do measure attendance for every session every year, and we use that as part of our reasoning for what topics get selected as well. Also, one thing that most people don't think about is you actually have 2 audiences. The first audience is the selection committee. So they're going to read your titles, your abstract, your notes, your descriptions, and decide, do we think that CodeMash is, the CodeMash audience is going to be interested in this topic? Is it relevant? Is it timely? All those things that we just went over. And so don't assume that the selection committee knows these deep, dark things about a particular technology and why they'd be relevant, because they might not. They're also multidisciplined. We have experts in each of those tracks, but if you look at our tracks, programming principles. So if it's programming principles, they may not be an expert in .NET or Java or whatever the language or topic that you're talking about. So you need to express to them why it's important and why somebody would care to attend that session. They will do a little bit of research, but they won't go into extensive research. They will use their background, what's going on in the technology space and those types of things to help make those decisions. But don't assume that they're going to know. Don't use acronyms and things like that. The second audience, of course, is the attendees. And the description abstract is used for both audiences. The notes that we'll talk about a little bit more later, only the selection committee sees. So if you want to give them more details and you want to hide maybe a reveal to the attendees at the actual talk, then you can separate that. But the title, the abstract / definition goes to both of them. So if you're coming here today and you don't have an exact topic, I want to give you some inspiration. And this is how I've thought about creating topics over the years. So one is new technologies. That's a pretty easy one. What are the things that people are starting to talk about? What is just showing up on the tech radars? What is getting some publicity? What's the new open source framework? Those are great examples of new technologies that you might want to consider writing a topic about. One of the things I often do is if I want to learn a topic deeper, I will make sure I have enough information that I could put together a good abstract and an outline for a presentation, and then I will talk on that. So several years ago, maybe a decade ago, I was interested in, I knew one-time passwords, OTP, but I didn't know it in detail. So I was like, I'm going to put together a talk on this. And I delivered it, I think, twice. I ultimately decided it wasn't that interesting of a talk to deliver, so I stopped doing it. But it taught me the technology behind it. So sometimes I'll choose a technology for that reason. Sometimes I see a need in either my company or the community. So many years ago, when Java 8 came out, a lot of web services were trying to make TLS calls, and a new CA came out called Let's Encrypt, and all of a sudden people's apps were breaking and they didn't understand how to debug all the TLS. So I put together a presentation of how to debug it, how to make sense out of it, and I called it, is HTTPS in Java making you certifiable? And that became a topic I gave over and over again, and I frequently give inside of companies I work in because we run into those types of problems. So that's a great inspiration. Look for industry trends. What are people talking about? What's becoming popular? So of course, right now, there's this little thing called AI that's becoming popular. Years ago, it was cloud. At one point, it was React. We'll talk about some of the disadvantages of looking for some of those industry trends and focusing on those, but those are options. Simply ask the people you work with or your friends, what would you like to learn? And then maybe target a presentation on that. That could be a great way. Look at other conferences and see what they're talking about. So most conferences publish what talks are going on there. Look at those, see if those inspire you. And then one of my most valuable ones is out of anger. And what I mean by that is, this especially happened when Docker first came out. I would attend a lot of sessions that would go into what Docker is and the details and why Docker is important, but none of them were showing me how do I actually use Docker. And I got so frustrated after a couple of those, I turned around and I said, I'm creating my own Docker presentation, the one I wish I could attend. And that was hugely popular. I did at a lot of conferences. I even got us denial of service at CodeMash because at the time it was pulling a lot of artifacts from GitHub, and GitHub thought we were denial of servicing because it was all coming from Sandusky, Ohio. Fortunately, we had somebody who was speaking there that actually worked for GitHub and said, no, this is legit traffic. So we got that fixed pretty quickly. I gave that same presentation at another conference, and we had rolling blackouts. We had so many people in the room that as people were plugging in, parts of the room were blacking out. So I find that doing something out of anger, finding one of these presentations out of anger is often the best inspiration I have found. Every year we do an interest survey, and we just did this recently. So I'm providing you the metrics here so that you can see what potential attendees to CodeMash are interested in. And if you look here, you can see architecture is by far the most popular topic during our interest survey this year. Now, the interest survey mostly goes out to people who have attended previous years, so we can't always guarantee, but based on this, it looks like architecture, and then software quality, which I think is interesting because thinking about the attendance, QA usually gets attended a little bit less. So it was very interesting that it's the second this year. Then AI with agents and workflows, programming principles, distributed systems and APIs, so on and so forth. If you look at the lowest end, what we see there is that the low code, no code was least interested in from the survey of this year. What I also like to include always in these conversations is how many submissions and selections actually happened. So that tells you what tracks are you more likely to get selected in. And I'm sure it's no surprise that everyone last year wanted to talk about AI. So we had 185 submissions for AI, but we only had 18 selected from that track. So about 10%. If you look at and you want to increase your chances of getting selected, we can see that mobile only had 18 submitted and 10 selected. So that's almost a 50%. So you have a much better chance on that track. So when you think about what your topic is, sometimes topics can be molded or shaped to possibly fit in more than one track. And using some of these numbers may help to improve that, that selection. Now, also, we have the right as the selection committee to move your talk between tracks, because sometimes people will try to use that to their advantage and be like, yeah, we're talking about mobile AI, so we're going to put it in the mobile track. But then you read the abstract, and it definitely all about AI, has nothing to do about mobile. So we do have the right to change that. These are the numbers from last year, if that gives you some guides. This is from the previous year, 2025. You can still see we had AI, and we didn't separate AI in this year like we did in last year's. And we only had 168, but 14 were selected. So it wasn't quite as This year we're doing AI ML, and then we have databases separately. So this year it was all in one. So think about those categories and what track makes sense for your topic and how you might be able to use that to your advantage when thinking about your audience. Let's talk about process. The next process step, which is writing titles, descriptions, and bios. So I thought I'd start with, here are some poor examples of titles. The future of AI. AI is changing everything. We get quite a few of those, actually. Microservices, good or bad. Cybersecurity best practices. My journey in tech. Those, I actually used AI to generate those for me, but they're not too far from a lot of the titles that we get. And the problem is it doesn't really help define the audience, what you're going to talk about. It's missing something that really grabs somebody and says, this is a talk I want to attend. So how can you improve a title? Well, you want to grab the reader's attention. You want to make it memorable, not too broad, not vague. Please, not too clever. We've had some people try to be super clever with titles and descriptions, and they just fall apart a lot of times. There's definitely a line, not being too cute or too buzzy. We get a lot of buzzy ones or promotional ones that are obviously trying to sell something. If we get the feeling in the title or the abstract that you're trying to sell something, it's probably likely not going to make the cut. So you want to give it a little sizzle, just like Sizzle from Fortnite. Make people, want to be interested in it. So here's some stronger titles that I would recommend. Designing reliable AI agents, 5 failure modes and how to prevent them is a great one. From monolith to modular, lessons from migrating a 10-year-old SaaS platform, modeling for small engineering teams, 3 architecture decisions we regret and what we do differently, debugging distributed systems without guesswork. So you can see a lot more sizzle. You know more of what the content's going to be. You could read those and say, am I the audience? Does it make sense for me to attend this? So like I said in the beginning, I do this in a workshop sometimes, but because we're doing this over the lunch hour, we don't have time. But if we had time, I would have said, why don't you take 5 minutes, take one of those ideas or topics you have, write a title, and then afterwards we could share those for people who felt interested in and provide feedback. What I'm going to do instead is, if you want, go ahead and do this exercise. Take more than 5 minutes if you want. You can always email me, and I'm going to have my email at the end. I'll be happy to review your titles, your abstracts prior to your submission. So hopefully you'll get that feedback earlier. But you could also share it with your coworkers, your friends, other people in the industry. Let's look at some abstracts now, some descriptions. So I actually took the description I did for this talk right here, and I ran it through AI, and I said, make it less interesting and poor. And I think it did a really great job. And this looks like what I would say some abstracts we get actually look like. So the title here is Write Conference Abstracts. That's like the dullest possible title you could come up with, I think, for this topic. And then this workshop is about writing abstracts for technology conferences. It will cover how to choose a topic, write an abstract, and avoid common mistakes. This tells me what it's going to cover, and that's good, but not in a very interesting way. Participants will learn some basic information about the conference submission process, and will have time to work on an abstract. I guess I could have said and title. By the end of the workshop, participants should be able to better understand how to submit a conference proposal. It does tell what they're going to gain at the end doing their conference proposal, but it's dry, it's boring, it's not really interesting. So let's talk about some ways that you might be able to improve this. And these come from a blog post written by Jim Holmes. If you're not familiar, Jim Holmes was one of the former CodeMash presidents in 2009. And this was a very popular blog post that a lot of people use and we still kind of promote because there's a lot of good stuff in it. So some suggestions: align your content with the event. We've had speakers, for example, that saw that we have a security track and they wanted to talk about their job as a police officer. Isn't the right security, right? It's not technical. And the abstract didn't read like it was technical either. So make sure that you're aligning the content with the event. Avoid overly broad sessions. Like, we're going to talk about AI, or we've had some in the past even that said, we're going to talk about the new features in .NET. And that was the entire abstract. Overly broad. That particular person was hoping that their name recognition would get them selected, and it did not. We'll talk about that a little bit more as an example. Titles matter, like we just talked about. They really do. Some people won't read the whole abstract. They'll make a decision based on a title. Or if you think about it, I've done this many times. I'm ending one session, about to go to another session. There are 3 topics I was thinking about. I don't go read all those abstracts again. I look at the titles and I make a last minute decision based on the title. So they really do matter. Take a lot of time and make sure your title will have a little sizzle and catch people's eyes. Explain what the attendee will get out of this session. The bad example I just gave does, but there's a lot of sessions that get submitted that don't explain what the user gets out of it. And when I get feedback after people have not been selected, oftentimes the feedback is, as the selection committee, I don't know what the attendees are going to get out of it. I don't think they're going to know. So call out explicitly. Give examples of what's going to be discussed. So even in the bad example, we talked about abstracts, titles, and bios, but incorporate some of that. We'll also talk about another technique using notes to do that as well for just the selection committee. But if you don't have some examples, then sometimes when I read the abstract, I'm not sure exactly what direction they're going to choose and go down. It may be a bunch of topics I'm already familiar with. It may be topics I'd rather go to that I'm not familiar with. But if that's not covered in the abstract, how do I know? Show prior examples of feedback on the session. This would be for the notes, and I'll show you where you can do that. Because if you have been very successful in the past at other conferences, it made sense that we'd want to have you speak at our conference as well, because you're going to have success there as well. Make sure that your abstract is concise. Sometimes people will ramble. And I'm not joking, when we've gotten abstracts that are pages long, nobody's going to sit and read that whole thing. Sometimes people will copy and paste their bio into the abstract as well, or put a whole outline. Nobody's going to read that, and it just makes it more difficult to pull out the important things. Make sure the abstract is comprehensive. It's going to cover exactly what you're going to talk about and give somebody a good perspective of what they're going to walk away from that talk with. And make sure you edit, re-edit, and please get it reviewed. It's obvious that a lot of the abstracts we get submitted, they never had anyone proofread it. Have your friend, have your spouse, have a coworker, have somebody proofread it, have AI proofread it. Make sure you're putting your best foot forward, which also, don't wait till the 11th hour and then submit it, because that's when people usually don't apply these good practices. So now let's take these practices and apply it to the same boring talk or description I did a minute ago to what I really published. From code to call for papers, crafting abstracts that get you selected. You can tell right from the title, if your goal is to get selected, this is probably the talk you want to attend. Hopefully it has a little bit of sizzle. It tells you this is for technical people through the code to call. So I think the title actually worked really well. You've got real world experience and great ideas. So these are for people who are experienced and have good ideas, which hopefully everyone wanting to submit does. But getting selected to speak at a conference like CodeMash takes more than technical experience. It's also clear, compelling communication. So we're going to talk about how to make your communications more compelling in this workshop. So they know that there's some hands-on stuff. Again, we're cutting it short because of the lunchtime constraint, but ideally you would work on it, and I've given you the ability to get feedback. So we'll break down how to choose a topic that resonates. We talked about some of the ways to do that, how to get inspired on those, writing an abstract that captures attentions and avoids mistakes that could derail your otherwise strong proposal. So we went through that list. I gave you examples of things that have derailed people in the past and how you can make it better. You'll leave with insights, tools, confidence to craft a standout abstract, which includes you can submit to me early and be ready to hit submit. So you know the output of this is you're going to have a submission that you can confidently submit. So hopefully this abstract applies directly to what we're doing here. Hopefully it has more sizzle than that first one, more interest. I think the title definitely jumps out more than how to write an abstract. And so hopefully this is a good example for that. So again, if we had more time, we would give you time to work on an abstract. Go ahead and do that on your own time. Send those to me ahead of time, definitely before the 11th hour, because that night I'm not going to be up at 11 o'clock reading people's abstracts. Send it to me several days earlier at least. By the way, our submissions on abstracts, day one, we get a large amount, and then it really gets quiet for the next several days. And then right at the end, the last 2 days, a lot of submissions. So I know most of you are going to procrastinate because we get more than 50% in the last 2 days, but I recommend starting today even. We'll talk about the timelines, but you have a good 15 days to work on this and get it ready and tuned before we even open up submissions. You also want to make sure you have a good bio. That bio should explain why you're a good person to present on this topic. Oftentimes we'll have people want to talk on like quantum physics. Well, just because you read a couple of articles or blog posts on quantum physics doesn't necessarily make you the right person to talk about it. If you have a PhD in quantum physics, that would definitely, I'm saying quantum physics, I mean quantum computing. If you have a PhD in quantum computing, you'd be a more ideal candidate. So you want to make sure that the selection committee looks at it and says, this is the right person to talk about this topic and represent it. You want to include some details about your background, maybe where you've worked, technologies you've used, and then what makes you interesting. Why are you the person that I'd want to hear this topic from? Not just from your background, but sometimes people are a little piffy, and that engages some people a little bit differently. So make sure you have a good bio that works well, get it reviewed to help make you successful in getting selected. Notes and comments. This is something if you haven't submitted before, you might not know even exists. We're going to actually go through the whole submission page in a little bit, but we do have a place where you can submit notes. And these notes and comments only go to the selection committee. They don't go to the attendees. They won't ever see them. So you want to use this to particularly target the selection committee audience. And sometimes, I mentioned before, people will put like a whole outline in the abstract. That's the wrong place to put it. If you want to share the outline, that's great. I think that helps a lot of times, but put that into the notes. And we will read those as a selection committee. That also helps us to understand what direction you're taking. So maybe, again, like I said before, you want to have a big reveal to the audience, so you don't want it in the abstract. But having that knowledge as a selection committee, we might say, okay, we see where this is going. We know the topics are going to be covered. So we're going to go ahead and select it, even if the abstract is a little bit weaker than we would have wanted, or if it doesn't answer all the questions that we talked about before. You can further define why you're the right person to cover that topic. So maybe you don't have the PhD in quantum computing, but maybe you did a summer internship on it, or maybe you have a side project, or maybe you went to one of the big quantum computing facilities and you got behind the scenes training, or you took a college class on it. So if there's other reasons that maybe don't fit in your bio, this would be another place to share that. We talked about previous experience. This is a great place to include that. So I spoke at Stir Trek and I had 500 people in attendance and I got 5 stars, or I was the champion speaker at the event. Those types of things can be really valuable. So put those into the notes and comments. Prior feedback about the talk. Sometimes people will put in there, here's an exact quote from 3 people who attended my talk that, it was well organized and I learned things I hadn't heard before, and this is what I found most valuable in it. So include those in the notes. Sometimes people will link to videos online, maybe YouTube, of giving that talk previously. That can help a lot. We're going to give a caveat when we talk about the blind step. We'll talk about using URL shorteners there because we don't want to know exactly your domain or things like that. So include video links. We won't do it till further steps down the process, but I have on many occasions been like, I don't know if this topic would be interesting or not. I'll go watch the videos, and sometimes it's like, oh, wow, this speaker is amazing. We definitely want this talk. Or sometimes it's like, well, I think they're missing the mark. Everyone's heard these topics. So it can play both ways. It can help and it can hurt in some scenarios. I already mentioned outlines. Other details that the committee might want to know. So sometimes they'll be like, if it's like a hand-on workshop with hardware, I've done that many times with CodeMash, and I'll put right in the details. I will bring 25 kits at no charge, and it's going to include these components, and the kids are going to have fun because this is what they're going to do with those. So any type of those details that you don't want to put in the title, abstract, and bio that you think is going to make your topic get selected and a stronger, I highly recommend doing it. Put in the notes. Using AI. I cover this a little bit reluctantly, but I know a lot of people are going to do it anyway, so we might as well cover it. AI can be a great tool for this, and there's a number of ways of using AI to help write titles and abstracts. So you can actually see that I wish I was more clever and came up with the title for this one, but I went to, this is probably Claude, and I put in what I was going to talk about, who the audience was, details, and it asked me for a little bit refinement, and then it gave me multiple options where I did select one of the titles that they suggested, and then I took abstract parts from multiple and I kind of merged them together into my unique abstract. So starting with the general idea and then asking for multiple options is a great way of using AI as a thought partner. Another presentation I did, I come up with the title first, and I said, hey, why don't you create a abstract and some key points, and then I was able to use that as a good starting point as well. So use AI as a thought partner, but make sure you're not just generating a bunch of them that you wouldn't want to both present or that you don't know the real details of the topic. You still want to make sure it's something that you're familiar with, and you don't want it to do all the thinking or all the slides for you. Which reminds me, we do have a limit. I think you have a limit of 10 submissions. So you also want to be careful on how many topics you submit as well. So before you submit, please review your title, your description / abstract, and your bio. Have them peer reviewed. So one of the things I will do after I write my abstract is I have a group of people that I really trust and who have attended a lot of conference. I will email it to them, and I will ask them, not just, is this abstract and title good? I will specifically say, would you attend this talk? Why and why not? Because you're going to get better feedback if you ask that particular detail. And sometimes it misses the mark, and I'll get better feedback and I'll be able to adjust it and respond. Ask them, is the title and the description enticing and clear? Do you understand what I'm going to cover? And does it make sense? Does it hit the audience that would be attending CodeMash? Do you believe that I'm qualified? Do you believe I'm qualified to present this topic? And if you're asking good people, hopefully they'll be honest with you and say yes or no. So make sure you do that. I would also highly recommend, I said that there's a limit. Like I said, I think it's 10, it may be 8, but there's an upper limit. But I highly recommend everyone submit more than one abstract. You increase your odds of getting selected with more than one abstract for a number of reasons. One is you have more chances to win. Secondly, sometimes when we get down to the end, we have to break even. So CodeMash doesn't make any money. It's all volunteers, but we do have bills that we have to pay. Conference center, sweatshirts, all the things that go on with a conference. So we have to at least break even, hopefully a little bit more so that we can start paying for stuff for the next year. So sometimes we have to make decisions. If we have somebody who had 2 submissions that were really good and somebody who only had 1, and we can save money on a hotel room and everything else being equal, we'll have to choose one that has 2 submissions that can speak twice, because that way we can save that room rate. So again, multiple submissions is always betters your chances. 2 will submit the same talk with a different title and abstract to do like A/B testing. It's not great for us because then we have to weed those out a little bit, but you can use that as an option if you wish. Now, I've alluded this a couple times. We do have a blind round of evaluations so that people aren't just getting through on name recognition. We do have some people that do name recognition and give us 1 sentence abstracts, and they're likely not going to get selected because they didn't tell us what they're going to talk about. I gave the one example. We had somebody from Microsoft who had a very high position, very well recognized name. We're going to talk about the future of .NET, and that was it. Then we had a local talent who didn't have the same qualifications, but their abstract was really well written. We could tell what they were going to discuss, and we could see that they really thought through it. They got selected, and this particular individual who worked for Microsoft was not happy with us. But again, we can only go with what's in the abstract and the bio and make the best choice. And if that's not in there for us to choose from, we can't just make it up. Another way I like to think about it is, if I read a abstract where somebody obviously hasn't spent the time for the abstract, and that takes 15 minutes, half hour, maybe an hour, and they can't spend the time to do that, what are the chances they're going to be able to spend 4 to 8 hours doing all the slides, doing all the details of the presentation, working on it well? Probably not likely. So you do not want to survive on name recognition alone, especially since we do have this blind evaluation process. So what that means is we don't want to know who you are. So a very popular thing to do is say, we're going to talk about how Chris is going to talk about how to improve abstracts. Well, if you put your name in there, you are going to be disqualified. We're going to throw your abstract out like you never submitted it. If you have other PII information in it, so I brought up URLs before. If you have your personal domain on there, so javajud.net, everyone would know that's probably me. If you have that in your notes or in the abstract, that would be PII information. We're going to reject that. So in the case of URLs, that's easy to solve. Use a URL shortener, bit.ly some random number. Then we don't know who actually owns where that resulting domain is. If you do get selected and you feel really strongly that you need that PII information in it, we can modify the abstracts after you get selected. So remove it for the selection process, we can add it back in. Now, if you do want to share credit card numbers, we do take those, but any other PII information, we're not going to take. So that applies to both the title, the abstract description, and the notes. We don't want PII information in any of that. So don't include PII, don't rely on name recognition, don't assume, this is an important one, just don't assume that because you're a sponsor, you will get a regular speaking slot. We do have other sponsor session slots that you might get, but we had a sponsor one time who dragged me all the way across the conference center to look in a room during the sponsor session that was packed. They had a big audience, and he was very mad. Why didn't we get a regular session? And I said, this wasn't my track. I didn't review it. Let me go back and look, and I can give you feedback. And I went back and looked, and the very next bullet point, don't have your assistant submit for you. I'm quite convinced is exactly what happened. In the abstract, it was one of those pages after pages after pages, because they put in the abstract the description like they should. They put the bios for all the speakers, and there were multiple speakers, which we can talk about that we don't allow. And they also put in this really long outline and all the details in detail that they're going to talk about. So the abstract did not read well at all. It was so confusing, and I'm pretty sure an assistant did it. And once I shared, well, this is what we had to choose from, they understood why that talk wasn't selected, even though the topic was great. People wanted to see it. Also, from the sponsor perspective, the speaker selection and the sponsor group, they don't talk. So the speaker selection doesn't actually know who is sponsoring. So we do that intentionally so that we're not biased. Don't submit your outline in the description, and make your description. Don't make your description or notes a novel. The attendees aren't going to read it. The speaker selection will read it, but they'll be grumbling the whole time if it's super long, because they know that the attendees won't. So those are very common mistakes. Try to avoid those. And again, PII, if you include that, we just throw it out immediately. So when we open on August 15th, you'll want to go to codemash.org/call-speakers. We have also some other rules and suggestions. You want to read through those. They will provide you a lot of detailed information, including the PII information that says you'll be excluded. Highly recommend you read that. One of the other things that's there that's important is the type of sessions that we have. So you'll have to select what session type you want. So pre-compilers are 4 hours long. We prefer those to be hands-on, and those are held on Tuesday and Wednesday. So only on those 2 days. We have general talks, which are Thursday and Friday. Those are all 1 hour long. We have bite-sized breakouts. So this is like an in-between general and pre-compiler. They're 2 hours long. Ideally, they're hands-on, but they don't necessarily have to be. We also have two different CodeMash options. So we have the 1 hour and then the 2 hour dives that are geared towards different age ranges. The dives are for 12, 17, and the regular CodeMash 1 hour sessions are anywhere from 5 to 17. And those are Tuesday through Friday. Here are the tracks that we have this year. And again, I guess I accidentally had the previous year submitted topics, but these are the tracks that we'll have. Those are also listed on that previous page. So I covered a lot with writing titles, descriptions, and bios. Any questions?
Chris, I had a question about, and I think in the chat, is it worth to submit same session like next year or in few years, obviously adjusting for latest state of things? Because sometimes I've seen speakers kind of delivering the same talk or along similar tracks. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, we frequently have the same speakers present the same topic for a couple of years. We try not to do it more than 2 years in a row. So if you've already done it 3 years, probably not, but or maybe have a break. So it depends on the topic. Is it still relevant? Do we get a big audience? Do we think we could still get a big audience? We may select it again. So definitely feel free to do that.
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about submitting. So we use Sessionize for submitting, and I have some screenshots of what it looks like. So if this is your first time submitting using Sessionize, you can create a brand new session, and we'll talk about that. Otherwise, if you've spoken before at conferences and use Sessionize, it keeps the previous session, so it makes it a lot easier, quicker. You don't have to fill in all the same things. But you'll want to have a title that we talked about, the description or abstract that we talked about in detail. And you also have the session format. So that was the list I talked about, the regular session, the pre-compiler, CodeMash. You also can put in tags. You can put up to 3 tags. So maybe your topic is AI, but you're going to use .NET to talk about it. And maybe it also includes an interesting architecture aspect. You could apply some tags to that as well. Now, it may sound harsh that we say we throw out your topic if you have your whole session, just that session, if it has PII information in it. But in this process, you agree to that you agree that there's no PII. So you've been warned in writing. I'm telling you now, it's on that speaker page. So we try to warn you as much as possible. And then we also have the make sure you have an updated email so that you'll actually receive the invites. One of the hard things we have to do is track down people over and over again to get confirmation. Then you'll put in your bio, which we talked about. There is a tagline as well, so you want to think of a tagline in some way. We need your phone number. Again, if we have to track you down and you're not responding to email, we might resort to calling you on the phone. This is not something that will get published to attendees. Also, if there's an emergency last minute, we've had people that got stuck in snowstorms, surprisingly, in January in Sandusky. We collect your pronouns. If you're traveling from outside the US, we especially want to know that because it might mean that there's visa processes and things like that. And then sometimes we're fortunate that employers will pick up the hotel, so then we don't have to incur that hotel cost. Or some companies, they're actually not allowed to accept that because it falls under the gift category. So let us know that by choosing the appropriate designation here. And then you have to agree that we can put your information up on our website so we can promote it. That's all the information you need. Hit submit, and then hopefully we will notify you. So the date ranges, we open up call for papers on the 15th every year, August 15th, and we close it August 31st, promptly at 11:59 Eastern Standard or Eastern Daylight Time. And so this is that range that you're talking about. So just slightly over 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks to get your session in. Again, most of the talks either come in the first 2 days, and then more than 50% come in the last 2 days. So you have a big window. You start now because we're looking at July 29th right now. So you have like over a month to work on this and get ready for that and get feedback from myself or others. Then you have the waiting game. You have to wait to find out, did you get selected? Now, I know it's painful to get that message if you didn't get selected, or sometimes you got some selected and not others selected, and you really want to know why. If you want and you didn't get selected, we have a way to get feedback, and I will read your abstract and your title and your bio and provide feedback. So maybe when you submit in future years, you might be more successful. But what I really want you to know is just because your session got rejected, it doesn't mean that your topic was bad, your abstract was bad. There's a lot of competition, especially if you look at the AI. I mean, there were a lot of rejections. There were way more rejections than there were acceptance. So it is not a reflection on you or your topic or anything else. So some things to think about: selections can be affected by track balance. If everyone wants to talk about the same exact topic, so it's not just AI, but it's maybe Claude AI to write skills. If everyone submits Claude AI skills talk, well, that's going to be a really boring track. So we're going to have to pick things. So you don't always want to pick the most exciting thing. Even if that's what you want to talk about, try to make sure it's diverse enough that you're not competing against everybody. And when we're only selecting 18 out of 185 submissions, we have to start thinking about things like that because there's a lot to go through. If there's a lot of duplicated, this is similar topics, we can't have all of the same thing because that would be a very boring conference. Think about the session format needs. So sometimes we'll get people that will submit something that they say is a workshop. So it's a pre-compiler, but it doesn't sound like anything that's hands-on. So make sure that you fit the right format. Make sure the audience mix is right. We're looking at, is the audience mix, is it appropriate for what we're selecting? The overall conference programming. So last year, unfortunately, was like AI in all the tracks. We try not to do that. Every year there's too much JavaScript. There's not enough JavaScript. So we try to balance a lot of that. And like I mentioned before, we do have budgets that we have to fit into. So sometimes we will select speakers to do 2 talks in order to save some hotel budgets, things like that. If you do get a rejection, another thing I would highly recommend is try again next year, get feedback, try again next year, try other conferences, try other user groups. Maybe because we're a multidiscipline, maybe your topic won't land because it's too specific, too detailed, but maybe it'd be perfect for another conference, and maybe you'll get lots of other conferences interested in it. So think about those as well. Last, then you're going to prepare your material, you're going to rehearse it, you're going to deliver a winning talk at CodeMash, and lots of people are going to thank you and be really happy. And then what I think is the most important thing that people don't think about is you want to reuse this topic over and over and over again. It takes a lot of effort to build a good presentation. And if you've built it, you want to get a 2 for or a 3 for out of it. You want to use it as many times as possible. So think about, would this topic be good at a user group, at another conference, inside of your organization, and find ways to repeat giving that talk so you get the biggest bang for your buck. Good luck to all of you. I hope you all submit and get selected. If you have general questions, you can email speakers@codemash.org. We'll be happy to answer any of your questions that you might have. Again, I will be happy to give feedback on any of your submissions ahead of time, not once the process started, not after you submitted it, but before you submit it. You can email me at chris.judd@codemash.org or javajudd@gmail.com. Thanks for being a great audience. If you have questions, reach out to me, and good luck. I hope to see you at CodeMash in January.